Welcome to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures, with CEO and award-winning author, Yvette Bethel. This podcast is dedicated to providing leaders with solutions to build trust, inspire authentic transformation, and improve engagement. Learn about new and tested ways you can revitalize your culture, empower people, and transform your results.
This is Yvette Bethel, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Evolve. Evolve explores modern leadership topics and cultural transformation strategies that lead to strengthened work relationships, enhanced flow, and dynamic balance, all grounded in trust, integrity, and emotional mastery. We explore ideas that translate into practical applications for contemporary organizational challenges. This episode of Evolve will explore sandpaper people and attachment styles. And to explore these topics with me is none other than Maria Jackson. Now, Maria is an author and writer for 6 Seconds, the largest global emotional intelligence network. She's also an avid gardener and world traveler. Her noble goal is to nurture inner illumination, and she's grateful to work and live in a world where she can practice her noble goal on herself and others. Welcome to Evolve, Maria.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get started by learning a little bit more about you. So please share what you'd like our audience to know about you and, what makes you interested in exploring the topics like sandpaper people and conflict and so on.
Sure. So, as Yvette said, I work for a nonprofit that teaches emotional intelligence. So, my job is basically to dive into all fun bits of psychology and self inquiry, and then make those super practical for the average person. So, it also applies to my noble goal, which, as Yvette said, is to nurture inner illumination. So both of these topics are really rooted in your inner patterns and then how they express themselves with others. So that's where my interest comes from. I also have a background in psychology. So this is super yummy and geeky to me.
Well, I love geeking out on these podcasts, so this is very cool.
Good.
So you mentioned to me that you did not come up with the term sandpaper people, but certainly you're very aware of them. So share with our audience exactly what is a sandpaper person?
So a sandpaper person is the person who just rubs you the wrong way. Like they literally feel like sandpaper to your skin. And usually when I say that to people, someone comes to mind.
Also, it's literally a trigger then. When you use the term, it triggers some, idea of a person.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I can just imagine that sandpaper on my skin and how that kind of feels. It's like someone's like sandpapering your soul, like these people,
That's even worse.
they drive you nuts.
Now, on one side, that's more of, we talked about this earlier about on one side you have uh, the and sandpaper people act like the side of the magnet that repulses,
Mm-hmm.
but there's another side that attracts. Um, and tell us a little bit about attachment and attachment styles because they work together in
Mm-hmm.
some odd way. They play out in organizations.
Yes. So if the sandpaper person is the one you want furthest away from you, then attachment styles describe the people that you want to be closer to. And this could be in your personal life, like this often comes up with your romantic partner or your kids even, but it also shows up absolutely in organizations. So if you want to be closer to your boss or you're doing conflict resolution with a colleague, attachment styles come up.
So what are the attachment styles?
There are 3 attachment styles. So the first one is a secure attachment style, which we all kind of strive to have. And then there's also an anxious attachment style and avoidant attachment style. And people can have a bit of a mix of these, but those are the 3 main ones.
Hmm. So based on, your yeah, adventures in organizations, what kind of leaning do you come across the most?
Um, well, the secure attachment style is the most common.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and then people often have a flavor. They'll be, secure anxious or secure avoidant. So how about I just briefly describe like what that means?
Yes.
So it's really all rooted in your childhood development. And then what we'll be talking about is how that shows up as an adult.
Mhm.
So a securely attached person feels safe in who they are. When they have a conflict with another person, they feel pretty safe in saying, this is the issue I'm having. Could we talk about some ways to fix it? Because they feel secure within themselves. So it doesn't feel threatening to ask for something that they need in conflict resolution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what that brings to mind is a lot of times people avoid saying or bringing how they feel into, the conversation because they feel or they associate confrontation with a fight. They feel
Mm,
like it'll escalate immediately, and confrontation doesn't really need to be that way. So I'm happy that you're explaining it this way because this is a really calm and easier way of dealing with the conversation instead of it escalating into something out of control.
right, right. And I think your awareness of your attachment style can help you see when that conversation is getting out of control and why it might be. So
Hmm.
if the secure person feels really comfortable bringing up their needs, the anxious person, the anxious attachment style person is going to feel like, I need to make this better right away. And so actually they might go into conflict too, because if they see it as a way to get closer to the other person. So if you think about it in terms of like someone talking to their boss, it might
Hmm.
be they have a bit of a conflict. The anxious attachment style person is actually going to be quite likely to go back in there into the boss's office 10 minutes later to be like, let's make this better.
Hmm.
I want to talk about it. Let's make it better. Um, but that doesn't mean they do it from a place of security or that they necessarily talk about it in the most secure way, because it's not. It's like, I need to make this better so that I feel okay. I need to make this
Yeah.
better so that I feel safe again. And then the avoidant person is not going to want to talk at all. They really value independence. So if they feel conflict, say with their boss again, they're going to say, you know what, I'm independent. I don't need you anyway, and I'm not going to talk to you for the next 3 days.
Hmm.
So really different ways of showing up in conflict.
So let's I think there used to be a movie where or it was a TV show where you had people acting out. I can't remember the name of it, but they were acting out, their lines, and then in the background, you could hear their thoughts, right?
Mm,
And what's really going on deep within them.
yes.
So let's play with this. How about if you have a sandpaper person, who's in a workplace, and then you have, let's go with the anxious style, because a lot of times there's fear in workplaces, and people, are unwilling to say what they really think.
Hmm.
So, with that background, let's, you know, tell me what a sandpaper person, or come up with some scenario where a sandpaper person is maybe a boss is talking to an avoidant or sorry, an anxious employee.
Well, okay, so the sandpaper person would be defined by the person they're talking to.
Hmm.
And it's a little bit okay. So attachment styles are for people that you want to get closer to. That's where it shows up.
Hmm.
A sandpaper person is never someone you want to get closer to. So, like, I'm not actually sure how the attachment styles would show up with a sandpaper person. Probably is just your avoidant tendencies would come out.
Yeah,
Like, I just
yeah.
want to be, I just want to be away from you. But shall we talk about, an anxious just in a situation with a boss?
Yeah, because you made an important point. I don't think in many cases people are not aware that they are considered a sandpaper person because of what you just said.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone, and so this is, I'd like for I'd like to explore this so that it can help people to see maybe I am a
Yeah.
sandpaper person, because we always listen to these podcasts and think, well, that's the other person. I could name 100 other people like that, and they don't look at themselves. And so I'd like for people to be introspective.
Right. So the saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Mhm.
I would say the sandpaper is in the eye of the beholder.
Ah,
So,
yes. Yeah.
someone who might be a sandpaper person to me might not be to you at all,
Right.
because I have my own particular points that have been rubbed raw.
Hmm.
So, for me in particular, actually, it's when others aren't considerate. Oh, it just drives me crazy. If there's someone who's particularly not empathetic and not considerate,
Hmm.
it they will be my sandpaper person. Whereas for you, maybe it's it could be a different characteristic that really just rubs you the wrong way.
Hmm. And sometimes sandpaper people can be the product of an environment where there are a lot of demands, and over time the pressure of those demands cause them to react uh, with the people that they work with, and in their minds they're thinking, I need to get this done. My intention is to get this done. But as you said, the empathy is gone because, they're in fear mode too.
Hmm.
They're just trying to stay out of trouble.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And
it's you probably see this come up more often in situations of stress. But
Mhm.
again, uh, my sandpaper person isn't necessarily going to be the same. I don't want to say that sandpaper people are just inconsiderate. Maybe for you, it's when someone doesn't show respect.
Mhm.
They don't say yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. It just drives you crazy. For me, it doesn't. So again, the sandpaper person is completely unique to the person you are, not
Mhm.
who they are. All of us are probably sandpaper people to somebody.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. So
I
for
was going to ask you
example,
that.
because of my tendencies, right? Like if I tend to not like when others aren't considerate, some
Mhm.
might consider that I am too considerate, and that might
Mhm.
drive them crazy, right?
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
just depends on your particular raw spots of how your sandpaper person is going to show up for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, some work that I'm doing on trust also, plays this out similarly, because we all trust different people for different reasons. Like somebody who has high integrity can be, that meat with the blood, you know, I'm going to say it like it is kind of person. And then someone who's very sensitive and, or someone else who may have something to hide, they don't like that.
Right.
And so they don't trust that, even though integrity in that person's mind is, I'm all about trust.
Right. And someone
But
else could look at that same leader or, whoever it is with integrity and say, oh my gosh, I so trust you because of this.
right. So and that same integrity can be sandpaper, as you say, for some.
Yep. Yeah. So it really, I think, ends up telling us more about ourselves than it does
Mhm.
about the sandpaper person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Hmm. So the other idea of the sandpaper person that's really beautiful, why this is such a beautiful analogy, such a beautiful metaphor, is they rub you the wrong way, like sandpaper, but they also sand you down to the core of who you are.
Hmm.
So it's also this beautiful way of thinking about how the sandpaper person, if you look at them in a way that's helpful, they actually show you all kinds of things about yourself. So for me, if someone else just drives me crazy because they're not considerate, maybe I don't offer enough consideration to myself.
Hmm.
So in this way now, the sandpaper person is helping me to grow.
Hmm. So, from your perspective, Maria, how can someone realize when they're being sandpaper? Because we've established that we can all exhibit that quality depending on the situation. So, how do we recognize in that moment, uh, or in emotionally intelligent, in an emotionally intelligent way, that we are being sandpaper?
Too
Sand.
simple.
Go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah. So how do we recognize that we're a sandpaper person to somebody else?
Hmm.
I think it really comes down to empathy. You know, if someone keeps shying away from you, if they keep avoiding you, if you're talking to them and they like literally start getting red,
Hmm.
those signs that someone is irritated with you is a clue that you might be a sandpaper person to them. And then it's, the only way to really know is to ask, and they may or may not be truthful, but it's a very hard thing to do. But you could ask and say, I kind of get the feeling that something's off here. Like, is there something I'm doing that's annoying you?
It takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah. And a lot of security, right? Going back to
Yeah.
those
Oh
attachments.
yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
feel very secure to say that because you're basically asking to be
Yeah.
criticized.
And you're spot on. I remember I fell into a trap early on in my career in my 20s. One of my bosses said, what do you give me some feedback on how I'm leading.
Ooh.
And I didn't know anything about the politics of situations back then. So I answered. Well, that didn't go very well.
Uh-huh.
For years.
Did you stay at that organization?
Yes, I did.
Wow.
Luckily, the question came at the end of my stint or that role. So I
Okay.
was moving on anyway, but that just it ended up being a very bad idea.
Right.
Because most times people ask questions like that, they want you to tell them what they want to hear. And I didn't realize it then. You know, in my youth, I was just like, oh, they want to know.
Right. Well, you could do this or that.
I was a sandpaper person. Anyway,
Yeah. And that's actually, though, it's a good example of on the flip side, was it a he?
a she.
A she. Had she actually been willing to receive feedback, that sandpaper could have helped her become a better leader.
Yeah,
So it is, it just depends on how open you are to receiving feedback and to growing.
yeah. I mean that's coming through so clearly. Now, you mentioned empathy as a tool to use, but
Mhm.
I'd like to help people understand, because empathy is one part of the process. But when people are triggered initially by the sandpaper, um, what do you suggest they do to become aware of, what's going on within them and tap
Mhm.
into that?
Yeah, so this kind of self-awareness piece.
Hmm.
The first thing, it's often much easier for people to notice physical sensations rather than the kind of more metaphysical emotional sensations. So to notice, is my face hot? That's one way we can know that we're annoyed. Or is my heart starting to beat faster? Am I taking shallow breaths? Am I literally feeling myself lean away from this person? So
Yeah.
it's actually kind of empathy directed inwards. It's noticing, okay, what's going on with my body? And then the next step would be labeling that emotion. So, I notice my heart is beating really fast right now. Like, am I annoyed? Am I
Hmm.
frustrated? Am I disgusted?
Hmm.
And then from there, you can start to unlock what's really going on for you.
Yeah. Now, I want to shift a little bit to the attachment styles because we spend a
Mhm.
lot of time on the sandpaper person. Uh, what can someone do? to recognize an anxious or avoidant style, and then take action that's healthier, more
Mhm.
secure.
So it's easiest probably to start in trying to notice for yourself what attachment style you have. And it's probably most going to show up in a relationship that you are really close, because that's the kind of person that you really want to be attached to,
Hmm.
attached securely to. So, like I said, that's often with parents or with a romantic partner, or even with kids. And so, what you need to look out for is when we get in an argument, what do I do? Do I feel like I need to go get space? I need to go get in the car and drive for 45 minutes because I need to feel okay again in feeling independent and worthy? Then you likely have some avoidant tendencies.
Hmm.
If you get in an argument and you storm out of the room and then 2 minutes later you're like, oh my gosh, I need to go in there and make up. I just want to hug them. I just need to feel okay again. Likely you have some anxious tendencies.
Hmm.
And if you're in the argument and you can think through, okay, I'm safe here, and all we really need to do is come up with some compromises. So why don't I see how they're feeling right now? Those are signals of a secure attachment style. And again, they can be a mix.
Hmm.
But yes, so that's recognizing in yourself.
I was reading a study or several studies the other day. So I was doing some research, and it was asserted that between 10 and 30% of the people in the workplace have some kind of personality disorder, right?
Mm,
And these disorders create certain, shall we say, systems of behavior. So let's take, some kind of a narcissistic
mhm,
pattern, right?
mhm,
Which, narcissists like a lot of, hey, you look great today, and, you know, come in and chat, and just keep that attachment. They want to feel that attachment when it's you know when they're in that mode.
mhm,
How can I've seen where this creates anxiety for people. It causes people to want to avoid. It's very difficult to connect in a situation like that. So with your psychology hat on,
mhm.
you know what what advice would you give to someone who's dealing with, and it doesn't have to be a narcissist, it could be any of the clusters. What would you say to a person who's trying to navigate that kind of minefield?
Mhm. Um, well, I would say it really, in my mind, it depends on the personality disorder. So for a narcissistic personality disorder, when you're dealing with someone with narcissistic traits, I think it's particularly important to hold on to what you want, especially if you tend to not do that. If you tend to be a people pleaser, they're just going to take and take and take. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to kind of stay very aware of what it is that you want, because you can't count on the narcissistic person to look out for you, right? Because
Yeah.
it's because it's a limitation, because they have the limitation of only being able to see from their point of view.
Yeah.
And I think it then changes depending on the personality disorder, but for a narcissist, that's what comes to mind.
Yeah.
What do
So
you
that's a hard one, because there's so many other personalities in the workplace. Some people want to be attached and want that connection. And so the push and pull of they draw you in and they push you away. That creates dysfunction.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people who are secure start to become, insecure about things if they're not aware that they're working with somebody that has a disorder. Um,
Absolutely.
So it has a destabilizing effect, especially if that person is a leader. But even if they're not, they're they can be very influential and, you know, create, uh, they can create attitudes and biases toward people. So it's a tenuous, or it's just a very difficult situation, and each one is I think for me, I try to avoid becoming food for them. You know
Mm,
what I mean? where
yeah.
where they are, drawing on my energy of giving them what they're needing constantly, and I'm really being secure in myself.
Hmm.
So that's very important, because you can undergo a lot of attack by not uh, bending in that kind of situation. So you have to be prepared for lots of different things. And it really depends. I think it's situational. Each person has a different level of strength and tolerance for this type of thing.
Right,
And
right.
I watched a video the other day with I think it was Steve Harvey and Monique, where he didn't back her up on something she said, and he basically said, I'm going to sacrifice my integrity so I can be safe and so my family can be safe. And you know, it was interesting because you see that every day in the workplace, but nobody ever says it.
Hmm. Hmm.
but
Absolutely.
but that's literally what's happening.
Hmm.
People sacrifice, what they truly value and believe in so that they can feel safe.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And so it's a complex thing, and it's an individual thing. So that's all I could say about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It depends, because, I see that sometimes people's values end up being situational. If they're at risk, your hierarchy of needs becomes safety and security. You're not into self-actualizing and
Absolutely.
and growing. You into being safe. And
Yeah.
that's essentially what Steve Harvey was saying. I want to be safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not.
That's human behavior, right? That's human
Yeah.
psychology, is to secure those needs first.
Yeah. And so when they're not in place, people will adjust and adapt in
Mhm.
whatever way they need to. Some people have less need for safety, and
Right.
most people have a lot of it um, when they have you know bills to pay and children to take care of, and you know
Absolutely.
a mortgage.
Mhm.
They're gonna play.
Yeah, and emotional safety too, right? Like
Yeah,
that feeling of safety.
yeah,
Which, the attachment styles, I think, is really what that comes down to, is how do you try to regain that feeling of safety?
yes,
Or
yes.
did you lose it at all?
Well, that's a good thought. What do you mean by that?
I think the most secure attachment style person that we can think of, maybe the archetype for a secure attachment style. I think they can be in a confrontation and
Hmm.
feel very safe the whole time.
Yes, I'm very glad you said that. Because people don't associate safety with confrontation,
Right.
and that's a powerful place to be.
It sure is. And it doesn't mean being a jerk, right?
No, no, it
Doesn't
means
mean being narcissistic, or it means
no.
feeling within myself I am safe, and actually in that way then I can give to the other person a little more because
Hmm.
I'm not being so defensive.
Yeah, yeah. This is such an intriguing conversation.
Mhm. Another,
Well,
um,
go
I just
ahead.
want to bring up another intriguing thing about these attachment styles, and it's that it's actually quite easy once you are aware of your attachment style, and the other person that you're in confrontation with is aware of their attachment style. It can be pretty easy to work together in a way that helps you both feel safe. So, for example, well, a real example, I am secure anxious. So I'm pretty secure, but I do have anxious tendencies. My partner is secure avoidant. So he's mostly secure and then has avoidant tendencies.
Yeah.
So when he wants to run out the door, I can be saying, no, stay here with me. You need to feel better.
Yeah.
So you could look at that and say, whoa, that's, potentially a nightmare in the making. But actually, once we're aware of that, I can see when we're in an argument, and again, this could work for a boss, for a colleague, but I'll just explain in my experience. If we're in an argument, I can say to him, you know what, I can really see that you need to go have some space by yourself. Can we please both set a timer for half an hour, and then can you promise that you'll come back to me and we'll talk about this again.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, we're both taking care of, I'm getting the parameters that I know he's going to come back, but he's getting the parameters that he gets to go have time by himself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's really, once you think about it that way, and you could do that with a boss too, right? Listen,
Mm-hmm.
I can see that you need 30 minutes to think about this, or a day or 2 days, but can we make a meeting that we'll come back together and make this right?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a powerful example. Well, Maria, this has been great. I have one last question for you. If you were to leave one bit of advice for people, well, let's do two. One around being a sandpaper person and recognizing when you're in that mode. What advice would you give?
To clarify, when you feel like you are being a sandpaper person, or when you feel like you're being rubbed?
Well, let's start with you being one, because I'd like for people to become aware of themselves. It's always easy to pick up when someone else is rubbing you.
Stop and take a breath.
Yeah. Which we are doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, when people are rubbing you, what do you suggest?
Stop and take a breath.
Actually, it works both ways. It really does. It really does.
Well, when it comes to awareness, that is often the first thing we can always do. If we're like, whoa, what's going on here? Stop and take a breath. But really beyond that, if you feel like you're being rubbed, become curious. Right?
Yeah.
Become curious about what's really going on there.
And around one last piece of advice to do with attachment styles and under recognizing yours and what to do.
Mm-hmm.
What sound bite or would you leave with us?
Believe in the courage to go deeper.
Mm.
So we could walk through our whole life not knowing what attachment style we are or those around us, but have the courage to go deeper with people.
And is there an assessment or something that people can take to learn more about it, or are there many of them?
That's a good question, actually. I have not looked into that. You see this more in terms of theory, but I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's a psychological assessment about
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, with that, Maria, I'd like to thank you for such an engaging interview. Your insights certainly help our audience to develop the skills that they need to create a healthy culture. This has been Yvette Bethel and Maria Jackson, and we thank you for taking the time to join us on Evolve, Reinventing Leadership and Building Freedom Cultures. Thanks for listening to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures. Visit ifbcentral.com to learn more about how you can reinvent your leadership and transform your team, starting with trust.